well, they know about technology, so they should know about cybersecurity. Does it happen all over the world? Is just in our region, or is this changing?
That is not a unique problem to Latin America. That is something that happens everywhere, and I think it's even represented by, if you look at where the security organization reports in a company, it's very interesting. You know, I talk to my peers at banks, for example, and I say, where do you report to? Do you report to the CIO? Do you report to legal or finance? Or it's all over the place. 8 years ago, Andy made a decision when we were building AWS that security reports to him, directly to him. And that was intentional, because he wanted to set a tone through the company that security is the first thing that we do every day. And it's been very effective. People realize that, you know, this is not something that can be ignored and they can tell us to go away. It's something that if they don't do it right, they don't have a business. So they must pay attention to security.
I would like to know, like, what are the minimum requirements like a small company should have in mind when they talk about security?
Wow. So minimum requirements depends dramatically on what the company is trying to do with the data and what is the data that they're processing. Obviously, if the data is subject to regulation, you know, if it's healthcare data or finance data, there's certain things they must do in order to be legal. However, if it's just arbitrary information, basketball scores or something, for example, you have to be able to establish a set of identities for your users securely. You have to be able to authenticate those users effectively. You have to be able to store and process your data safely. And then you have to be able to transmit that information back and forth to your users in a way that you want. So you have to build each one of those blocks. Now, that's why we started off by building the fundamental services like compute and storage, because everybody, no matter what their business is, has to do those things. And then we layered services on top of that over time as we were approached by more and more verticals who were asking for specific help. So, for example, authenticating users. Cognito User Pools is the service that allows you to authenticate a mobile device, a mobile application, to a person. That's only necessary if you're building a mobile application. You don't have to use it unless you don't want to. So there's not an easy answer to your question. It's very dependent on the individual business. But everybody has to make sure that they secure their data appropriately when they store it. My personal belief is all data should be encrypted when it is stored. I think that's just good, sensible safety for everybody. And it gives us a level of protection. I don't want my staff to have anything to do with your data, any visibility to it at all.
Okay.
I have a question for Cesar that I'm going to have. If machine learning will reduce the human factor, the weakest link in the computer security, I think it's connected. Yeah.
Absolutely. The weakest link in computer security is often humans, and it is not because humans are ill-intentioned. It's because humans end up going to places on the web that they shouldn't, and getting phishing emails and other things like that.
Impressive.
Yes, exactly. Ooh, that looks interesting. Oh, no. Yeah, so that is absolutely the biggest weak link in the computer security paradigm is the human being. That's why I don't know if any of you happened to catch my talk yesterday, it seems like a week ago at this point, but one of the things that I focus on very carefully with the company is I run a series of things called security expectations. And these are goals that I set to every VP in the company. And one of the 7 major areas that I focused on this year was drastically reduce human access to data. And people say, oh, what does drastically mean? And drastically in this context means an 80% reduction in human access to data. And I get exactly that look from people. What? What are you thinking? Did it very intentionally. If I said 10%, which would have been reasonable, people would say, okay, that's I can get on board with that. You can do that by saying, all right, I got 10 people around the table, you're off the hook. You don't have to do that anymore. You all have to pick up her work. That's not what I want. What I want is to drive automation. By saying 80%, you must write tools to do things that human beings used to do. The wonderful thing about that particular goal was the operations teams looked at it and said, oh, we love this, because people type the wrong thing at the keyboard occasionally, causing outages, which none of us like. So by forcing people to tooling, it improves the security of the organization dramatically, and it improves the operational stability of the organization. So it's one of those rare occasions where security can actually help the operational stability of a place. And yeah, people, unintentioned people are the problem.
I think we all agree with you, because for journalists, for example, I think we all think that information is the most powerful coin that you
Yes,
can
it
use.
is.
So we always say, until you have someone with the ego or the access to information, a source will give this information and leak.
I was in the FBI for 10 years. The only difference between a foreign intelligence service and a reporter is motivation.
Yeah,
You have the same skills, you develop sources, you elicit information, you gather up little pieces from lots of different places and come up with a story.
So you're saying, what I hear you saying, and I see you guys working a lot, it's much more on culture, mindset change, right? Because it is about you, like, from the episodes we see like S3 buckets, we see that it's much more about the customer realizing that what is their part about it, right?
It is, and so like in the S3 bucket situation, S3 buckets, like all of our resources, come with control policies by default. And those control policies are by default closed. So what happened, unfortunately, was customers opened them up to the internet, whether it's unintentional or intentional, and didn't close them again promptly, which resulted in others being able to look at the data, which is a really unfortunate circumstance. So a lot of customers asked us to make it more obvious that they were opening them up to the internet. So about 8-10 months ago, we started putting up a big red and orange banner on the screen when you're going to open an S3 bucket. Really? Do you really want to do this? And then we were simultaneously building a service which we launched last week, I think. Pardon, was it last week?
Last week.
Last week, that allows you to set policies on buckets to say this may never be exposed to the internet. So companies can choose to apply that to their buckets, or individuals as well.
If you can mention 3 trends for next year in cybersecurity, which would be?
Wow. I think that other people will hopefully focus more on reducing human access. I think that's something that we should see more of. We will give people an easier way to prioritize their work. I think that's one of the areas that's tough right now. A lot of our engineers tell us they have alert fatigue, too many things telling them there are problems and they don't know where to start. So I think we'll see people do a better job at that, and we'll become better at investigating. So we'll be able to build a better map of what happened during events. And that's all based on what I think are going to be tooling changes that come over time.
And what about smart cities?
Smart cities are cool if done right. And so IoT devices, the thermostat that sits on the wall or the light controller or whatever, limited processing power, really hard to update, and incredibly vulnerable to problems. So that's why it's really important that people use the services which are designed to help protect those. If you look at Amazon's IoT offerings, we've had IoT Defender as a service for a long time, and that is a service that's designed to identify whether or not your IoT devices are behaving the way you expect. We've had some interesting results with that, by the way, in the operational space, in the sort of theme of security helping operations. One of our biggest customers for IoT stuff, who's got millions and millions and millions of devices around the world, told us that our security plant, the IoT Defender, identified an operational problem where they were reissuing device IDs repeatedly to devices, which was a problem because no longer could you differentiate whose was whose after that. But we said, that's a fraudulent ID because we've seen it before. Something else is going on. So I think that people will have to adopt more services like that. And more importantly, they will have to consciously build IoT devices with the idea of security updates built in. It's going to have to happen.
I don't know if someone has more question, because I have one more. I'm sorry, I always ask.
It's about security expectation.
Yes.
In your opinion, what business factors drive the adoption of IT security solutions and strategy?
The business factors that drive adoption of security solutions tend to be around the regulation of an industry or the risk tolerance of a business primarily. And regulated industries, of course, have a certain minimum bar that they have to meet whether it's government, which has very specific rules on security, financial services, which has subject rules for each of the individual countries, regulators, or like the European Banking Authority, for example, or things like healthcare, which has very specific rules. All of those drive specific security implementations, whether it's encryption or identity control or things like that. Beyond that, I think the maturity of the business often affects what security choices they make. You know, have they gone through the process of realizing they have data that's really valuable? Oh my gosh, I need to protect it appropriately. And that's a learning process that some businesses have to go through that's difficult. They don't originally think about the fact that I'm just a gaming company and I do chat between gamers. Well, no one's going to bother attacking that. Oh, yes, they will. Because, you know, the gaming industry is incredibly ego-driven. And so people are motivated to go after each other in that space. And so they'll try and break the back-end systems as a result. So people have to build the reaction to dealing with that kind of threat.
¿Alguien me va a preguntar? Que yo tengo una pregunta más. Since you were, I'm sorry, I'm always asking. Since you were in FBI, I don't know if you know about the Chilean attacks to the banks this year. The government named a guy who supposed to be in charge of cybersecurity of the country, but it happened like 2 months ago, and now his charge changed, so there's no one again. But what would you suggest to a government to do related to cybersecurity? Because in Chile, I think we want to do something, but I'm not sure if we know how to do it or what to do.
I don't think that's uniquely Chile's problem. There are a lot of places that have that problem. What we suggest to any customer, regardless of whether it's a government or not, is in order to make sure that you meet the security expectations that you have, first of all, you have to understand what data you have. You have to understand the risk associated with the data and how you want to protect it. And then you have to start measuring access to that information. For example, if you have voter records, which are critically important to a lot of organizations in government, who is monitoring who has access to that? Who's monitoring how they use that access to information? And where that information is being shared and stored, for example. Our government customers tell us all the time that they often have difficulty understanding how to build systems that meet certain security requirements. So in the US, for example, the FedRAMP rules govern how government organizations can store and use data. We had to build ways for them to measure their ability to meet those particular goals and give them literally templates that said, okay, use systems this way so that you can be secure enough. The flip side of that is, what should government be doing to help companies? And that's one where what we tell governments around the world is that the best thing you can do to help your businesses in your country is to provide them with actionable security intelligence in a rapid fashion. So the worst thing the government can do is put out a very pretty paper 6 months after something bad happened that said something bad happened. Well, great, we all know that because it was in the news. Where the problem is if you recognize there's a new problem that's just emerging, you need to get that into the hands of people who could do something with it right away.
Who has to do that? I mean, the army, the police?
That I think depends on the individual country. Because I don't know, first of all, who has the authority.
But what would you suggest?
To collect. I suggest you find the organization that is most willing to talk to people, to warn people, and give them that job. Because it is about getting information out. You know, if you look at the various attempts that the US government has had over time at information sharing that haven't been as effective as we want, it's usually because the information was given to some organization that is used to doing this with it. You know, we got to keep it all secret. Well, that doesn't protect anybody, doesn't help anybody. So you've got to find ways to use the material, especially when a lot of the intelligence is very time sensitive. You know, it's not useful after weeks or months or years.
Perfect.
I have one question for Cesar also.
Yep.
Are they aware if cyber criminals use artificial intelligence and machine learning to develop malware? or other attack tools?
Cybercriminals
Like,
certainly.
what are the tools, right?
Yeah.
The other side.
So the area that we've seen for a long time, for example, is mutation in malware as a way to escape detection systems, and that's been something that's been going on for a long time. Where we also see adversaries using not necessarily machine learning but artificial intelligence is in the discovery process across networks. So I get into your network. I want to see what else is out there. Well, I can design AI systems to help me map what's going on, gather that information, and then prioritize my attack list. That make sense?
Yeah. Cyber war, is it true? I mean, because we've been listening that word since, I don't know, 10 years ago?
I don't like that word. I mean, that sounds like someone's dropping computers out of planes onto people or something. But is there a real adversarial conflict in the intelligence space? Absolutely. There are some nation states who are very, very good at gathering information off of other people's computer systems, and they're not afraid to do it because they see it as a strategic advantage for them. So is that real? Yeah, it is. And it's an adversary we have to deal with every day.
And what about the small and medium business? How they can be prepared for this?
It is an absolute challenge for a small or medium business to do security right, and it's one of the reasons that I love working at AWS. So unlike some places, we operate all of our systems at the same assurance level, regardless of who the customer is. So for example, when Shell Oil comes in and asks us to develop a new security feature for EC2 or something like that raises the security bar up some. That same tool, that same capability is available to all of our customers, whether they're a giant bank or whether they're my son doing his university work using our free tier. He has the same security tool access that Barclays does, as an example. So that, I think, is democratizing. I really like that fact, that I can provide the same security tools to a small and medium business for a very, very low price that we do to the really big guys.
Is this going in the industry or not?
I think that we have a different approach than some people do.
Okay.
We focus a lot on cost following with our services. So some people price based on what they think they can get out of a customer, and they focus on only the big ones. We look at pricing a little bit differently, where we say, how much does it cost us to operate this service at a very large scale? And then we price it just a little bit above that particular cost. And that means that everybody gets access to things at really, really small costs.
Women in cybersecurity.
Yes.
Last week I was in Israel, and something that I really love was find a lot of women in cybersecurity.
Yes. Absolutely.
Most of them were in 8200, and I think their army is an empowerment arm.
They realize where they have some amazing skills, and they're not afraid to use those skills at all. They're really, really progressive that way. 8200 is an amazing incubator of smart people. And if you look at the number of startups in Israel that have been begun by people who've left 8200, it is tremendous.
Yeah, a lot. And how do you see, not in Israel, because that's a case of study, but all around the world, are always more girls coming into cybersecurity, or no?
We love it when they are. We try and encourage that a lot. We've done a lot of work with Girls Who Code, specifically focusing on adding security work into the Girls Who Code curriculum. And as a result, I hope to see a lot more security engineers coming out of that at the other end.
Good. I just want to make a last question, but this is my curious because I get
Okay.
so excited about the ground station announcement.
Yes.
And I always like to go back a little bit about when we talk about infrastructure and everything else. So the announcement of more hardware and also ground stations, you guys will be directly connected and working, right?
Yes.
And how to prepare this there's a new way that also to educate the customers about it, right?
Yeah, the ground station is just another example of where we identified a gap in the ability to get data and to move it into our systems and process it. The satellite world, all the data is sitting up there above us, and it's always been this really thin pipe that was controlled by a very few ground stations. And as a result, we said, that's silly, because there's a lot of value that can be extracted from the images, for example, that the crop imaging satellites pick up. It can show much more of the planet, and we can get it off of there cheaply. as opposed to the expensive stuff that used to happen. And it's also a heck of a lot of fun.
What is the challenge related to the station? Because I think it's a lot. I mean,
The challenge is
thinking about-
automation. Nobody has automated that stuff before. So we had to build all of the tools that allow you to schedule the antenna movements, to move the antenna to a particular location, and to move the data off of that and then process it on the other end. None of those pieces had been built before.
But let's imagine it's being hacked.
It's not gonna be. That's not gonna be.